Hey guys, welcome back to GameTree. Today we'll be looking at what exactly is the 16 Personalities Framework, often called the MBTI. We'll be looking at a quick history of this, a comparison with the Big Five Ocean Framework, and also just what exactly are these letters meaning? What do they mean when they make up the names like an ENFP or an ESTJ? As usual, we're going to be just taking a look at what is the most necessary information to know in its simplest form to be able to get the maximum results and information useful. We're not going to be diving super deep into the details, just making this really applicable and useful in your life. So the 16 Personalities Framework was originated by Carl Jung in about the 1910s, who was a Swiss psychologist and protege of Sigmund Freud. Carl Jung's very famous, you might have heard of him, or you could look into him if you're more interested in this kind of psychology philosophy. And then in World War II, this framework was a lot more popularized because during World War II in America, a lot of the guys went off to war. Women were filling roles in the workplace, and this framework was used to help women find out what's the perfect job based on their personality, because prior many of them had no work experience being confined to the households. Years later, it became popular in the Eastern Europe and Russian world, known as socionics, where less attention is paid on job satisfaction and fit, and more about relationships and algorithms between people. It's really popular actually being used to find out who's the ideal type of person for you to date based on your personality. Since then, it's been used in a huge plethora of other frameworks. It's the most popular framework in the world where people use it from everything, including sales and coaching and different sorts of models. Usually the tests are done as a result of some sort of personality questionnaire, or you can do it through observations such as the MBTI Foundation, which was the World War II version that's become very popularized and associated with the framework, but by no means actually encapsulate or own the framework itself. Despite all of these tests, it's really hard to know your own personality type because we're so subjective about viewing ourselves. For example, it's really easy to notice tons of flaws in others, but it's really hard for us to know about ourselves. This is by psychology, design, evolution. But a really good way of knowing about yourself is to have some sort of external person type you or get feedback from friends. But we'll also be doing a video later so you could check back on how to know about yourself and some tools and strategies that I use and have adopted from around the internet to help type people. Now, a lot of scientists are discrediting the 16 Personalities Framework for being non-scientific, but it's still a very useful mental model. And what's become popular is the Big Five or Ocean Framework. And why this is considered scientific is that it's reproducible and more objective, but it doesn't necessarily dive deeper. The way the Big Five works is they essentially took all the different personality traits and cluster sampled them, looking at correlations between people who have traits, and it just turned out that there were 5 different clusters. It's a very superficial way of looking at things, kind of like describing a dog based on looking at how a dog walks and acts, rather than knowing the science behind what's inside the dog and its organs or its DNA. They're both useful models, but they're just different approaches. And I personally prefer the 16 types model. It takes a little bit more information to get into, but it explains way more information. So let's get into the details. The 16 personalities breaks down into 4 different kinds of letters that you have 2 choices between: extroverted and introverted, intuitive and sensing, thinking and feeling, and perceiving and judging. And if you put these different combinations together, you get 16 types. The first option is extroversion and introversion. And extroverts are people who tend to get more energy from the outside world. They tend to be more enthusiastic, outgoing, maybe think on their feet. Whereas introverts are people who are more introspective, they're more quiet, they're more observant. There are a lot of different kinds of extroverts and introverts. For example, I'm an extrovert that's a productive extrovert. I like getting things done, being productive, teaching, learning. Whereas somebody else could be a very social extrovert, where they like small talking, connecting with other people, and sharing values. Now, despite all of this, the system of the Jungian typology 16 personalities really does go into these details on a deeper level, but again, we're focusing mostly on the cursory level where you can get the most benefit out of knowing the least. The next option is sensory and intuitive. You'll always see the intuitive type written as a letter N though, because the I is already taken by introvert. A sensory person is one who looks at the details, the facts, the situations. They want to know things in the concrete world before they'll see the patterns and ideas that connect things. Whereas intuitive people, they tend to lead with the big picture. They want to know the patterns and ideas, and oftentimes they don't need that many facts. For example, they can go all the way to Z in the alphabet just by saying A, B, C, and then assuming the rest of the letters in the direction things are headed. Next up is thinking and feeling. And this is often related to emotions, but it's actually only partially true. Thinking people are ones who not only use logic, but actually base their decisions on logic. Whereas feeling is people who use their values, which often manifest in emotions when making decisions. So a thinker type, on average, as a stereotype, you'll think of like a programmer or some sort of scientist. And a feeler type is usually somebody who does things based on what they like or how they feel about things. So you'll see a lot of artists in this field, for example. And then lastly, we have the perceiving and judging dichotomy. Perceivers tend to be more laid back. They don't like to make commitments until it's necessary at the last second. They're not always going to be as orderly, and they're going to be more messy. Whereas judgers, they're people who tend to want to categorize things. They want to have things figured out ahead of time. They don't feel comfortable until a decision is made, and they'll commit to things as soon as they're asked about them on average. So by combining all these different kinds of dichotomies, you get a lot of information about what somebody's like and their implications based on just a few small little binary pieces of information. Now you might start to value yourself or others based on the rarity of types, but just so you know and make it useful, a lot of the statistics are completely inaccurate because they have very bad sampling. For example, the MBTI is very biased towards corporations, and the kinds of people that work in corporations are going to be certain kinds of people that are disproportionately represented. So don't always believe these numbers, and try to just accept people and take them at face value of their types. Don't try to lump them into rarity buckets. Now hopefully you have a better understanding of a little bit of the background of the 16 personalities framework and how it works. It goes a lot deeper, where you can have different versions of extroversion, introversion of different functions. For example, explaining how there's a multitude of different kinds of extroverted people. But now you know the cursory information. I'll give a link below if you want to learn more about the kind of information. And also there's a new framework that's expanding this from 16 to 512 personality types by Dave Superpowers. And I'm really amazed by this because he's taken it, made it very objective and scientific, and I see this becoming the main framework that's used in the world. And lastly, if you want to learn more about your type, we have a test with a publicly available link down below, and also an app that you can download and take the test through, where you can use this sort of information to make friends, filter by types, or even meet people through games, accounting for not just the games that you play, but also personality compatibility. Thanks for watching. Let us know what you think in the comments below, and subscribe if you want to see more content like this in the future. See you next time.